Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this session on building environmental resiliency, the road to COP26 and beyond. My name is Perry Hewitt. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Data.org. Data.org is a platform for partnerships, and we're focused on building the field of data science for social impact. We work alongside social impact organizations, philanthropy, academia, and private sector actors, and we're working to reimagine the use of data and data science to empower the social sector to tackle the world's most pressing problems. It will surprise exactly none of you that one of our 4 critical focus areas is climate change. Climate is front and center of conversations everywhere, not only among environmentalists, but in classrooms and in boardrooms increasingly in equal measure. The outlook is, to put it plainly, dire, but there are some actions still in our hands. Just this week, research from the journal Science highlighted intergenerational inequities in exposure to climate extremes, meaning some generations are faring far better than recent ones. Today, babies will grow up to experience twice as many droughts and wildfires and 3 times more river floods and crop failures than someone who's 60 years old today. And the inequity is not just intergenerational. It's not just young versus old, how we experience climate. It's geographic. For example, children born in Europe or Central Asia between 2016 and 2020 will have about 4 times more extreme weather events in their lifetimes under current emissions pledges, but children of the same age in sub-Saharan Africa face 5.7 times more extreme events. So the data really have never been clearer. We need to take concrete action. And with that, I'm utterly delighted to be teeing up a powerful and timely conversation as we hit the road to COP26 with these Data.org partners about their use of data to address climate change. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Bruno Sanchez Andrade Nuno, who is the Microsoft AI for Earth Director, building the planetary computer to kick off today's conversation. It shouldn't take a rocket science to fix climate change, but we're really lucky to have one here today. Thanks so much, and over to you, Bruno.
Thank you, Perry, and thank you, Data.org, for hosting these in-depth discussions. I will start with my ask to everyone who is listening here, which is that this is for all of you. This is an amazing opportunity to speak directly with some of the people who are doing extremely good impact on the ground. And let's just use this opportunity and to ask questions, to learn from the work and all the amazing work that they are doing on the ground. So the background of this, as Perry was saying, is leading to the COP meeting in a few weeks. And as he was saying too, the science, the data, is clearer and clearer, and it's darker and darker in some sense, because we see that the chances of getting to crossing the 1.5 degrees above the pre-industrial average temperature, the chances are increasing. There is some factors that they have basically something like 400 gigatons left for the whole future, and at the current business as usual emissions, it will be done in 7 years. So all these 2030, 2050 pledges that many companies like us are doing have to also include a progressive reduction starting now, that's what, for example, we are doing at Microsoft. There's also other factors that the human activities are responsible for most of these warming of the climate, which leads to climate disruptions and more extreme events, which is the biggest short-term factor of disasters and loss of lives. And that what I would stop saying, I continue saying all these factors of what's going to happen with climate change, but we are here not to dive on that. But as I was saying before this panel started to my fellow panelists, is that this is not just a pessimist story. This is a possibilist story. There is so much we know we can do. And the speakers we have here, which are the awardees of the Inclusive Growth and Recovery Challenge, show us on the ground what can be done today and how they have done it. So we have with us three people: Danielle Getzinger, the CEO of Community Lattice. We have Olasimbo from the Nigeria country director from Solar Sister, and Thomas Motmans for Sustainable Energy Finance Specialist base. And I love to see so many people saying where they are hailing from on the chat. This is truly an international event. I forgot to say what I do at Microsoft. I'm the program director of the Planetary Computer, which is basically a geospatial platform to do all the work that you need to do with climate change or biodiversity collapse and all of these issues. Before I start introducing and letting our fellow panelists introduce themselves, let's do a little poll, because for example, the meeting that is coming up in COP has 4 pillars, which is, to say it briefly, one on securing the global net zero. The second one is on adaptation to protect communities and natural habitats. The third is mobilize finance, and the fourth is to working together to deliver results. So the first question on the poll that you will see now is to know in which one you're working on. The second question, as you should see on your screens, is how you're using data. We are hosted by Dataorg, and it is undoubtedly so the case that data could be an extremely powerful ally, not only to see what's happening, but also to see to help us decide what we could do. So I'm just feeling a little bit of time to get you all to answer that question. I'm going to answer that question myself too. I don't think I can say the host cannot answer the questions. I need to wait for a little bit for all of you to get the answer to the question. While that happens, also to say that the Planetary Computer is available to all of you. Just go to planetarycomputer.microsoft.com. It's open access for everyone. You just need to request it. Let's wait a little bit more for the result. There we go. So it seems that it's a tie of working to adapt communities and natural habitats, and on working together to deliver. Not surprising. And I am really glad to see this result, because one thing we are seeing more and more in the front lines, which is not yet, I don't think you will hear it more and more, is one, the need to protect not only communities, but also habitats. There is a huge interrelation between nature and people. And if we take care of nature, we take care of people, and we cannot take care of people if we don't take care of nature. So there's a deep interrelation. That's why also not only the IPCC, but also the IPBES, which is the sister organization to the IPCC that deals with biodiversity and biodiversity collapse, is saying those things. And then working together, this is crucial to work together. And this is what we're trying to do with this panel. And how using data to research and development. This is a crucial one. I was mentioning that probably the phases of data is diagnosis or measuring, then monitoring, modeling, and then managing or helping to drive those decisions. Okay, so that was great. Thank you for everyone for answering that question. And now we'll start with our fellow panelists. So I'm going to start asking all of you the same question to give you also time to introduce yourselves, then one question for each of you, and then please, everyone who's listening here, send your questions in the Q&A on the system on Zoom, so to make this as useful to you as possible. So, Danielle, Olasimbo, and Thomas, as you start introducing yourselves, please reflect also on what roadblocks have you found in your career working on this field? What were the major challenges to have a bigger impact than the one you had? And what has been the role and the evolution of data and data science to help you deliver the results you are achieving? So let's start, for example, with Danielle, and please also make a mention of what we are seeing on your background.
Sure. Thank you, Bruno, and thank you everybody for being here today. It's great to be here with my fellow panelists, and thank you to data.org. My name is Danielle Getzinger. I am the co-founder and CEO of Community Lattice. And in simple terms, we help communities navigate the complexities of environmental risk. And when I think of environmental risk, we really focus in on understanding the cost and liability of investing in brownfields or contaminated properties. We work in environmental justice issues. And of course, while we're all here today, climate adaptation and resiliency planning. And so, Bruno, to answer your questions about, why with the roadblocks and the challenges that we see, really it comes down to, the fact that we haven't prioritized climate action. We have the answers, we just haven't prioritized and incentivized doing this work. And we work with governments, we work with local governments, big governments, we work with nonprofit developers and the private sector as well. And the biggest roadblocks that we're seeing is these systems that we have in place, especially the incentive programs and the government systems that dictate a lot of what we do, are not answering the real world, real-time conditions and concerns of communities. And that is especially true to overburdened and underserved communities. And the way that we use data and the way that Dataorg has given us the ability to enhance how we use data is that we're using that to help communities access information. And so what I've seen over my career as the evolution of data and data science to solve problems is really the evolution of that access. We now have beautiful visualizations, we have interactive data, and that is the key to bridging a gap in communication between the scientists and the non-scientists and the people who are in these communities that are most affected, that want to be included and need to be included in the solution. So I'll pause there and let you talk to the other panelists.
I already had a ton of questions for you, Danielle, but let's go with the next panelist. Please, Olasimbo, if you want to go next.
All right, thank you, Bruno. I think I get to keep the bragging rights to talking to rocket scientists. That's for me. My name is Olasimbo Shojiri. I'm country director for Solar Sister Nigeria. At Solar Sister, we're building a network of women entrepreneurs that are distributing a range of clean energy products across, especially in underserved communities. So for us, the major challenge is, how we can combat energy poverty. And as we know, this creates a multitude of negative consequences on the health, education, and incomes of these off-grid communities that we work in, generally and particularly women. We find that 6 out of 10 of the world's poorest people are women. And we get to face this extra burden compared to men that make us more vulnerable to extreme poverty and reduce our ability to participate fully in the economy. This is characterized by unpaid work, fewer assets, gender-based violence, and generally a lack of representation in leadership positions. So for us, gender equality and equitable access to data continues to pose a challenge, and it stalls our progress to achieving measurable impact, especially against climate change. So for us, the scarcity of consumer and market data that has been identified by us as the major barrier in innovating, especially in the businesses that our entrepreneurs are doing. And we believe that these gaps include things like the lack of the robust data. We have biased data, we have expensive and time-consuming efforts. And a lot of times we find that our decision-making is based on gut and instinct. So for us, that's why data is really, really important in making this shift.
Wow. Again, I had so many questions, but this is more about again, people ask questions on the chat, so I can then, if not, I'm happy to ask you questions. So Thomas, please.
Hi everyone, I'm Thomas from BASE, which is stands for the Basel Agency for Sustainable Energy, and we are a not-for-profit foundation based in Switzerland, Basel. And we are also a specialized partner of the United Nations Environment. And our role is to develop financial mechanisms and business models to accelerate investments into renewable energy, energy efficiency, climate change solutions. Actually, today, there's approximately $600 billion flowing into, let's say, green investments. And according to the IPCC, we need 3.5 trillion on average. So there's a big gap. And there are some market barriers that we see as the roadblocks to actually achieve climate change, which are barriers that slow down the rate of investments into these technologies. And I'll cite a couple here. One of them is the fact that these technologies typically require higher upfront investments compared to alternative technologies. And even if this results in mid and long-term savings, it's still a sensitive point for adopters. Secondly, the adopters, which could be enterprises, could be farmers, could be households, have other investment priorities. They have their own business or their own things that they like to do, and they do not want to invest in these new technologies, which typically is just something they need to continue with their own operations. Then there are other elements related to the risk perception of these technologies. They're new. So many of these entities have difficulty in assessing the actual risks related to these projects and the technologies, and also whether indeed the returns that are promised will be achieved. And then there are other roadblocks and challenges which are related to access to finance and credit, and also to the fact that financial institutions have limited visibility and experience themselves with green projects, and also the risk and return profiles of these projects. So these are some of the challenges that we see, and there data science can play a big role, because all of these or most of these are related to trust. So data science can really help to bring trust and confidence, and this is something that I'm happy to explore also later.
Yeah, well, I guess I could use the same question for you and Danielle in that sense, but let's start with, again, with you, Danielle, a more specific question, and where we get some more from the audience. So you were saying in the introduction that there is more data now, there's more access to better data for the people in community. That gap is basically, in a sense, closing. And what people, I would say that what people used to call the data divide, now I think is reframed, rightfully so, in data dividends, which is the fact that when you have data, then you can extract more value and then start making the better decisions. And specifically, I would love to ask you, when you work to drive, to get insights for opportunities of reinvestments in the hands of all of these communities, can you give some specific examples how data science is used to identify these opportunities?
Sure. So the data science so let me explain a little bit about the project that we're working on with Dataorg, because that might give some context.
Yeah.
We are bringing environmental records, publicly available environmental records, into a usable platform. Typically, you would need to spend a lot of money in order to get this into a report and synthesize it by an environmental professional, which is still needed at a certain stage of the project for liability protection. But to make a decision right off the bat, and to build capacity of the communities to receive funding and to be able to perform their projects, we're trying to get that data to them immediately to make an immediate decision, whether it's a decision on whether or not they're going to purchase a property at cash auction because they're competing with cash buyers and gentrifying forces in their neighborhood. Or they're, just the other day, my partners with RST Bioscience, they were investing or about to sign a lease on a building in Louisiana where they're going to start an aquaponics indoor farm, which it will satisfy, will bring in jobs. It will be carbon negative. It's everything that we want, those solutions for climate action and sustainable development being done by the community. And having that data and having those tools and that access to the information was that response of the real-time, real-world needs of the community in those situations. So we're able to use this data to inform and to make rapid decisions and risk-based decisions without slowing down the process of needing to find capital, to hire a professional, to apply for grant funding. So that's one way that we're using the data to drive some of that decision making and finding those the sustainable development strategies.
Thank you. Thank you. And also basically helping not only surface the opportunities, but also make the narrative of why this is a good investment, what are the risks, and then managing those
Yes, it's a risk management tool and a decision-making tool that you can apply immediately, that you can make some of these decisions and have confidence in those decisions kind of on the ground.
Yeah, and just to highlight some of the background things, I genuinely believe this is coming at the right time, not only because of the urgency, but also we've seen so much progress in the data gathering, data processing, and data visualization tools that enable that. Probably, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, those technologies wouldn't be possible or accessible, but because they would be too expensive or hard to use. But now it's getting easier. So it's coming exactly at the right time that we have the need. Okay, so Olasimbo, let's go with you and the amazing work you're doing on the last mile energy solutions for female entrepreneurs. It's not only the biggest minority women in the world, but also having the most undue burden on so many dimensions, from access to education, to financial services, to many, right? So I just want to echo the importance of what you're doing, and my wife also works on this issue, so I'm a bit more familiar with that. So I'd like to work on what are the relations of the work you do and how they could or do influence policy levels. Because there's not only the work that you do on the ground with civil society and others, but also there's some policy changes that need to be made from the lowest level, city level or neighborhood level, to the highest international ones. I'd love to know if you have some insights to share that could replicate it in other places.
Sure, Bruno. So for us, our work has always been centered around the voices of women, especially in the hardest to reach areas and what we call the last mile communities. But what we're doing with this project, the project that we have funded by Dataorg, is that we are collaborating with an organization called Frame. And the idea is to help us amplify the impact of what we're doing in communities. And by this, we're actually providing unprecedented insights into our market potential for the communities that we work in. We've never done this before in the past. So with this project, we're able to invest in data science, and it also will inform how we scale, and we can do this in a more systemic manner. And we can also help entrepreneurs themselves maximize their business potential. So for us, it does things at 3 levels. You know, it works at the local level, which is in our at the local level, which is in the communities, at the organizational level, which is for us as a nonprofit working here in Africa, but also at the systemic level, which touches on the policymakers that you were referring to. So, I mean, in the communities, we're doing things like understanding, you know, female-led households, you know, where entrepreneurs can find their markets, what will lead to greater market penetration and increase in sales, things like that. But as an organization, we're also using this data to actually determine where next we're going to, how to expand within the countries, how can we be more cost effective. So all of these, I think, feeds into the work that we want to achieve at the systemic level, which is how do we share these learnings externally, especially with industry players. How do we use our collective efforts in this project to serve as a model? Because we know that similar organizations working in the last mile can use this as a template or can use this as a case study, which would be very useful for other renewable energy distributors as well, microfinance institutions, and even other international development institution. So for us, I know just in July, we had a national roundtable, which was focused on policymakers. And the idea was to amplify the voices of the women entrepreneurs themselves so that the policymakers could hear directly from them, and they could use, you know, influences from them to actually inform policy. So from that, we had a policy brief, which the Ministry of Energy would be able to incorporate into their plan. So it's how we get the voices from the ground all the way up into making things like policy decisions.
Yeah, this is great. Sometimes we hear the policies work from the top down, like make a policy decision based on what the policymakers see, but in this case, it's the other way. It's from the ground. This is the policy changes we see could have a big impact, and let's work on that. This is a great story. I do see Catherine, Diana, and Jason asking questions, but let's ask first Thomas, one aphids to make it equal. And then we can go with the questions on the chat, okay? So Thomas, I think in the work you were mentioning before in BASE, working across many sectors, but one in particular that I understand you've been working more with the Dataorg is on post-harvest food losses. And I wanted to ask also, like in Danielle, more specifics, how does data help identify these losses and increase the income and reduce the emissions?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So before we go into the details of that specific case study, I just want to mention that in general, data science can really help to enable some business models that would otherwise not be possible to implement. And one of them that we hear a lot is this shift to a service economy. So we're going to an as a service model in many industries. And to do that, those service providers need data so that they can actually improve their services and that they can shift from being reactive to predictive and actually offer optimal services. Now, that being said, in the specific agricultural sector, and this is a project that we are working on together with Dataorg and our partners EMPA, we are looking at where does food loss happen post-harvest. And we are looking at how can we reduce that food loss and how can we increase the income of the farmers who suffer these food losses. And we are doing this by using on the one hand business model innovation. So we're using the cooling as a service model so that farmers do not need to actually make the investment in the cold rooms, but can access the clean cold rooms, which are decentralized and normally solar powered on a pay per crate or pay per use basis. And also we're developing a software that uses data science to do a couple of things. One of them is to predict the impact that this will have on the farmer's income and food loss, so with machine learning. So this also has the potential to inform farmers on whether it makes sense or not to start using this service. Secondly, we use machine learning to understand the grade of the crops that are stored in the rooms in the first place. This is with image-based recognition. And this is fed into a physics-based model that transforms sensor data, so temperature, humidity, into actionable information such as the number of days that the crop will still be fresh, so shelf life. And if you combine this with yet further data science, for example, market analytics, which we're doing as well, then these two pieces of information together can actually be run into an optimization model and give a recommendation on when is the best time to sell, assuming that there's only X number of days left and that the price might increase or decrease. So this is, and provide recommendations to the farmers based on that. So that's how we're doing this. And of course, generally digitalization helps to actually monitor these rooms which are decentralized and better assess or improve the operation of the rooms to make sure that the crops do not spoil.
Thank you, Thomas. Listening to the three of you in completely different areas, it also dawns on me that, and as we are hosted with Dataorg, that data not only is lowering the threshold of the needs to use it, as I was mentioning before to Danielle's question, that you used to be a massive expert with a lot of resources to start using these tools. Now it's the hands of more and more people in more and more places. So by lowering this entry barrier, we're also able to reach smaller farmers, communities, on the last mile of energy or possibilities to reinvest in the local communities, which is something that is part of what it is called the data revolution, which is fantastic to see. It could not come any minute earlier. Okay, so I have questions, and I said I love that. Jason, thank you let's go with that one. How can we, the community, Jason asked, support scaling this work for the greatest impact? Like in next year, if we come back to the same panel and you've done 10x more or 100x more because of the community, how can the community help supercharge this? These are more general questions. Please feel free to answer. If someone has answers too many, then I will distribute. But otherwise, please feel free to jump in to answer this question. How can the community support scaling up this work?
So Bruno, I can start there. And what I'm seeing with data, and one of the focuses and awarenesses that we have, especially working with vulnerable communities and communities that have not been counted traditionally in data, is that the communities need to, a lot of the, let me go to a story. Some of my friends in Houston's 5th Ward, they observed that everybody around them was dying. Turns out this is the cancer cluster, right down gradient of a rail yard. They're living on top of creosote plume. And that data, before they started getting involved and saying, we're observing that this is not being captured in the big data records, they brought that to the surface. They brought that data, and that was classified as a cancer cluster. And now we're working actively to try to address that. We wouldn't be doing that if it wasn't for the community. So we need to not only understand what the data is telling us, but more importantly, what the data isn't telling us, who is in control of creating that data, and whose voices are not included in it. And it's really the power of bringing in the community and having them understand how the data is being used and lowering that threshold of access, that we can start including them in the data, their observations, the data that we need to complement our data with, in order to drive, as Samanbo saying, we need to be driving the policy change really from the ground up. And that's how we capture that. And that's eventually how we then scale it.
Yeah, I love the data gaps, the things we know we don't know, but because we see gaps in the data. But in this case, we didn't know this until the community said, hey, there might be a cluster of cases here. I know it because I'm in the community. So yes, so that's definitely one way the community can help drive these data-driven policy changes or impacts. Olasimbo or Thomas, you want to answer this question too, or we can go to the next one?
I'd be happy to add something, because it's really building up on this, actually. It's a super good observation, Danielle. And in fact, something that is important to remember is data science can do a lot, but it cannot sometimes understand the underlying causes of what is happening on the ground. There are other factors that influence this, which might be local history, local culture, knowledge that only the communities might be aware of. And there needs to be a communication and a conversation between those who generate the data or the actual data and these people on the ground who are also the change makers. So there should be a match, and this content should be made available to these change makers in local communities, because they are the ones that can actually do something with that data. So it's data for the sake of data won't really do much actionable impact. Yeah.
Huge point. It's driving me data, but we drive, people drive. This is not about data. This is about people powered by data, but not data itself. And there will be cases where data says something and there are other reasons not to do it. Could be cultural reasons, could be historical reasons, could be religious reasons, could be many other reasons, diplomatic ones, economic ones, whatever there is. But huge point. Thank you, Thomas, for raising that. That is not just about data. It's very important, but it's about the impact on the ground, powered by data and other factors. Okay, so I do have, so Nicole from the Dataorg is telling me on the background that we have one, Angela Travers raised their hand. So if you can please put the question on the chat, that would be great. And then Diana Cuevas says, for someone starting in data science, what would you recommend to do in order to work for an organization that works in these topics? Like, for example, who do you work with, or who do you like to have more people with what skills working in data science so that you can empower more your impact? Olasimbo, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I'll chime in for what we did, because we are, kind of like the on-the-ground, local organization working on the local challenge. And so even for this project, we had to partner with an organization like Frame, that is their own specialty. So they have all the machine learning and all those like geospatial data. We have the intel on the ground. I mean, we've always collected data. So from the types of entrepreneurs, the communities that we're working, and just sales data, things that tell us basically what we're doing now. But the partnership is really like a match for us made in heaven, because we can layer that over data that they've gotten from secondary source, knowing up to 1 kilometer, the social, economic, or geospatial data. We can layer that on what we already know. And that's where we begin to get those sweet spots. So essentially, as Thomas was saying, so it's not just like data for the sake of data, but we actually marry that with our on the ground intel, I would say, and we use it to kind of inform us where to go. And I think that that's really been helpful. We also, through this project, have gotten, the personnel, like the data science personnel on board. So we always had like M&E and things like that. But we think that that's also really helping us integrate things that we are learning now into our practices, into our business as usual, and just becomes more of like an organic thing that we do. We're also bringing our entrepreneurs on by introducing some of them to digital for the first time. So some of our entrepreneurs are just handling a smartphone for the first time and just learning about that and how to now begin to use this data to help improve their businesses. So yes, I think it's having that expertise, but marry that expertise definitely with the underground intel. That's what we found in our experience works.
Yeah, I guess there is a tendency to think that you need fancy skills like machine learning and stuff like that, but maybe even more basic ones are still needed, and getting started with those is more, if we are driven by impact, starting with those. Danielle or Thomas, you want to also help Diana on this question?
Sure. I was going to also put in a plug for some of our partners on this Data.org project. DataKind is a fantastic nonprofit organization, and I'm going to, same advice I give to people who are just starting out in data science. A lot of students that we work with, they do volunteer data dives. They have a lot of different opportunities for getting involved at whatever level you're at. And I think that that's a fantastic opportunity to understand what your role could be in data science. I'm not a data scientist. The way I got into data scientist is I convinced a data scientist to go into business with me. So that's one way to do it. But really, DataKind is a great organization to look at and to volunteer time with.
That's actually exactly what I wanted to.
Danielle, did you explain, Danielle, what was the thing in the background? I forgot because we talked yesterday. Yes.
It's one of those properties that is a little risky to invest in. So when we talk about brownfields, those are properties with either known or perceived environmental contamination. And it could just be that perception of contamination that scares away an investor. And these buildings, they end up just not getting cleaned up, but they create dangerous conditions. They create blight. So I'm hanging out in the brownfield today.
Well, it's also an allegory of data science because it's messy, it's incomplete, but it's a lot of potential. Okay, Thomas, if you wanna help also Diana with what?
No, I just wanted to add that that's exactly what I wanted to mention DataKind as well, like Diana mentioned, and I also as a recommendation. I mean, if anyone who would do research on these projects and read papers, I mean, you can always reach out to the authors and then find out more about what they do, and you end up developing a little network within that specific niche of data science for impact. So that's also a little trick.
Also, at the risk of blowing our inboxes, I always say that just email people. Like I just said on emailing hours of others of papers, just email people to say, hey, I'm interested in this. How can I start? Or maybe they have resources. Maybe know the DataKind, for example. Okay, so it's really powerful. I do that even with books. If I read a book that I like, I just find the person on LinkedIn or whatever, I just email them. And it's surprising to see how, first of all, how glad they are to hear from people from all around the world, and also how that could drive impact on the ground. Okay, so we have another question from Catherine. What are some of the most difficult challenges you still have in accessing or working with data? We talked some of those, like data gaps, or not even data gaps, data holes that we didn't know there was a gap. But anyone wants to help Catherine put more light of still what is difficult accessing and working on visualizing what data? I see Daniela muting herself.
Thomas almost went first, but well, I actually just had this conversation this morning with my business partner. And when I think, again, I'm not the data scientist, but when I think of the challenges, I think, okay, what are the things that either the data kind team comes to me and asks for clarification on, or my my business partner. And it really comes down to the systems that governments or we work mostly with government data. There's no standard for how to manage it. And the language is often just it's really technical. So sometimes it just doesn't make sense. One state will call an environmental record one thing, and another state will call it another, something completely different. Just thinking about environmental data. So anytime that you have a permit to have chemicals or release chemicals, or you have a spill somewhere, it creates a record. And every state is different on how they categorize that and how they report that. So I imagine it's really similar with other sets of data that there's a whole bunch. We just went through what is a landfill today? And you think that that would be fairly straightforward. It is not. So that really comes down to, it's really the granular data and how it's being categorized and managed.
Yeah, data is standards, which is probably a very boring topic, but as you point out, is extremely vital for data discovery and then leverage the data. I always remember the case when there was this massive earthquake in Haiti many years ago, and there was a trove of people who were basically digging through all the files that they could find for information about Port-au-Prince and others. And all they did was standardize it in the same format. And that proved extremely vital for even the producers of the data themselves, which were now able to consume their own data for actionable insights because it was transformed into something they could work, instead of like PDFs in CSVs or Excel or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Nicole, for the link for Dataorg. Subscribe to know more about specific jobs and learning opportunities. I also want to +1 the Data Kind, because they're an amazing organization.
So for us, I think the challenges are, even not knowing what you don't know. It's always hard to get at it. So even from early on, from just the needs assessment, like just how to even get people to understand what they need. I think we ran into some challenges there, and training, and also just getting buy-in, and these are all like behavioral change issues. So people have been doing something one way forever, and just getting them to understand that there's a new way to do this thing. And sometimes it's as deep as someone thinking is a mystical thing, like, okay, using this map is mystical, or it's, or has some religious intonation and things like that. So there's quite some cultural barriers sometimes that needs to be overcome in order to be able to use this in an optimal way. I think those are sort of some of the things. A lot of it is around capacity building and, just getting people up to speed on even just understanding the need for using data in a new way and having that inform us. So I'll just put some of our challenges in there. And of course, there's also the digital challenges that we have. There's technology, just access to it, and having the tools that you need in order to access data in an optimal way.
Yeah, very important points. Before joining Microsoft, I worked at the World Bank for a few years, and one of the things I used to say is that in many places the cloud is too far away. Like even accessing all these resources, which are amazing and elastic and all of these things, it just doesn't work. And yeah, I could go into more details, but this is about you all, not about what I've done. But I also wanted to echo that something you said explicitly and you implicitly, Danielle, which is that data is not mystical, and sometimes we need to change how to do things. And when Danielle, you say, for example, I'm not a data scientist, I would argue that it shouldn't be, it's not an identity, it's a method. And just like you don't need to be a mechanic to use a car, you don't need to be a data scientist to use data. So yes, you need some skills or method to then generate insights from data. But I generally personally think that we should make data science as uncool as possible, as normal as possible. It's not, oh, this fancy thing that only few people know and you need to do many years. Of course, you need to do training if you want to do whatever, deep learning, but there is the barrier of entry for doing data science should be so invisible, so small that anyone could start that path instead of saying, no, I am not a data scientist and it would take me a lot of effort to do that. And I know you don't mean that, Danielle, but I think it's a personal battle I have, which is to diffuse what a data scientist is so much that anyone can start the journey.
Yeah, I think that what you're pointing to here is being careful of our language and making sure that that aligns with that continued evolution of accessibility and acceptance of that data literacy. You know, when I say I'm not a data scientist, I am not allowed to go anywhere near the code because I will break the computer. But don't want me even in Excel. But you're right. I mean, we've adopted our business model, and I think that everybody's business models at this point should be data driven. Our policies, our regulations, any decision making at a very, community level, from selecting where you're gonna take your kid to the hospital to where you should invest FEMA dollars, right? All of this is data driven, and we need to be including everybody in that journey of data literacy.
On that, let's go another question, which is something Dataorg focuses a lot, is the stages of maturity for different institutions and stakeholders, from local governments to NGOs and others, like could be yourself. Some are very mature in the data maturity. They know what data science is. They're using it. Is an integral and critical part of the way they do the theory of change or the way they do business. But in some cases, like Olasunbo was saying, not only they are not using them, they don't want to use them. So I'd love to know you have stories to share of cases where you found that, and hopefully you were able to change the mentality and start to integrate all of these, remove those barriers for those who did not use data science. Any story to share on this? Thomas, for example, that you haven't spoken in the last one?
Sure, happy to contribute. So I see two things. First, I see ourselves as an organization, in this case BASE, not really having used data science too much, at least until this project. So this is new for us and we are learning, and it is great because this enables us to start improving the services that we offer, improving these models by leveraging data science, which of course are really important to make some of these function and function well. And what this also does is encouraging technologists or scientists to use their skills for impactful projects. On the ground, because I think your question was more related to actually the data used on the ground, we have the situation in which farmers are definitely not used to using data and not necessarily particularly willing to do so. And also there's some technology issues in that many do not have a smartphone. So then comes the question, how do you actually, enable or provide the outcome or the output of the model? How do you provide information to the farmer? And then there's different options that we are exploring. One, well, you can always translate the data into more simple data that can be transmitted via means like SMSs, which do not need a smartphone to receive, or it can be interpreted by someone who can then simply explain the results of the data. So in the end, the data or the models provide recommendations, and someone will then understand the recommendations, and that someone can then be a translator into whichever the local language is, even for people who might not directly understand the technology. So yeah, that's some insights from the ground there.
Hola, Simbor, Danielle, any experiences
Sure.
winning the data science fight?
I can share some of the practical things that we would do. So for instance, when we layer all this data, all the geospatial data we have and all the variables and all of that, and it creates these hotspots. So where we believe that, the entrepreneur, for instance, we've created the ideal profile of a cash customer, the ideal profile of a credit customer. We as the organization can take this information and feed that directly to the entrepreneur. So the entrepreneur might not necessarily have to look at the map herself, but she now has the list of places where she will find her ideal cash customer, her ideal credit customer, and she can sell to. So I think we're having a combination of having the tools in the hands of the entrepreneurs themselves and having it interpreted as well through our local mentors and coaches of the entrepreneurs themselves to use the data. So I think it's a combination of it, but the idea is that we're not just relying on our gut feeling or just on our, how we traditionally did it, but we have this extra tool to help improve efficiency.
Go, Danielle.
So I was going to share some, and I don't want to say it's a data fight. I think that there's a reality and an awareness that we have when we are working with communities that data can be invasive. Data can be something that that opens, or at least there's a perception of vulnerability and opening yourself up to vulnerability. And we see this actually the most when we started our project with Dataorg. One of our partners is Kansas State University, and they have a technical assistance to brownfields program, and they have one that focuses specifically on tribal nations. With tribal nations, we talked to the Indigenous Design and Planning Institute, and we are very sensitive and aware that there's a data sovereignty that they have within their nation and within their culture that it is not our job to force the data and the adaptation of the data science on them, but to hand over the tools and allow them to take that into a safe space where they don't necessarily need to share their data with us. We're going to provide them with data. We're going to provide them with the tools for them to explore their own data, but removing that, approaching that with some sensitivity, that not everybody is okay with sharing the data because the data has led to exploitation of people.
Yes, it's a really good point, Danielle, that working with data doesn't necessarily mean sharing the data. Maybe it's data that is very private, like for example, health-related data, that it's more about upskilling or training how to use that data. In a sense, is your voice. Yes, working with data might be vulnerable, sharing data might be vulnerable, but it's also your voice. And if you want to use these powerful methods, work with data. Doesn't necessarily mean that you need to share that. So thank you for that. Let's start. It's looking at the clock, it's like 5 minutes left, and I would love to reflect, first of all, that these are amazing stories. And I highlight that the story part because I'm a data scientist. I love data. I think that unlocks a lot of value, but we are people. And I genuinely believe that people work with the stories more. Stories predate history itself. We were sharing our culture and our trainings from generation to generation using stories before we used any kind of written record or anything like that. So thank you very much for sharing your stories. I think those stories will remember and will inspire the positive change we need. And I would like to ask a round of sharing, if you have other stories to share that could be memorable. There is a really good book called Story Works that goes very, very much in detail of why stories work and what's the power of that I very much recommend to anyone. That's why I highlight that. But also helping everyone who's listening and they want to tweet that they were here. What is the tweet or the story that you would like to share with everyone that drives this hopeful nature of the work you're doing on the ground to the conversation that is leading to the COP meeting? So inspire the generations to come with the work you're doing. Let's go first with Thomas, for example. Or if you are not ready and Ola Sim or Danielle are ready, feel free to go. Hola,
So my
Simba seems
tweet
ready.
will be, let's demystify data science and make it more practical.
Okay, demystify and make practical data science. Solar Sisters. At Solar Sisters, right?
I'll say use the power of data to make agriculture more resilient. I couldn't find my unmute button before.
When
Not
a
part of
tweet
the
is
footer.
short, but if you want something else to share, please also use this is more of a closing round. So feel free to also share things that I wouldn't have time to talk about, but that's a good tweet, Thomas.
I mean, what I would like to add as well is let's also use data to evoke emotions, and you refer to it. We see a lot of data, and it's quite dry normally. And what we want to do is also use art and really, have people link it to emotions, and just data does not need to be dry necessarily.
Yeah. Danielle?
Okay, well, you'll be happy to know I just made a Twitter account, so I'll be able to tweet something. See Perry excited about that. So what I would say is, we have the solutions for climate action. Those solutions exist. So we need to find how to use data to drive the real-time, real-world needs to make those solutions a reality.
Thank you. Well, someone was asking, Catherine was asking about the title of the book. I cannot find it, but I will tweet it. So anyone can use it. And please continue this conversation over Twitter or contact them directly if you want to know more. I wish next year, if we do this panel again, not only you can come back to share all the 10x things you've done, but some of the people that are listening now are going to inspire to do something similar in their own regions. Because again, at the end of the day, this is elevating the work you're doing. You are the heroes we need for the climate action, just as much we need our elected leaders in the meeting in a few weeks. So thank you very much for all that. I don't know, Perry, if you want to do also some closing remarks.
I just wanted to thank everyone so much for being with us here today at data.org. We are so privileged to work with founders, entrepreneurs, and creative thinkers like this who put really the humanity back in data and data science. So thank you so much for being here and have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.